Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our brand new movie review. We're going to review the movie The Sacrifice by Andrei Tarkovsky, and it's a very obvious copy of Ingmar Bergman style. And so it looks a lot like an Ingmar Bergman film, and therefore it's about the existential plight of mankind. And in this particular film, Tarkovsky is going to pull together Nietzsche and the doctrine of eternal recurrence, along with Russian Orthodox faith. Now, if he is successful in that, that is to be determined, but he's going to bring together Nietzsche and eternal recurrence as the central theme of the movie, but he will interject Russian Orthodoxy as well. Let's go to block one. Man's encounter with history and the yearning for something real. Alexander is every man who yearns for real life. Otto, the postman, is a retired history teacher. He represents history. Now, the first posited axiom by Alexander is a system of virtue could change the world. And then he asks the question, is there a universal model for absolute truth? Is there an absolute model? Is there a universal model for absolute truth? In block two, we get that answer as a proposal from Otto. So block two, the concrete challenge comes in the form of Nietzsche and his thought experiment of eternal recurrence. Is this the universal model? Eternal recurrence is the death of dying to the self, and then expurgation of going out of the self in a sacrificial act of spiritual cleansing, then returning to the inward self as new embodied existence. But Alexander's answer must be worked through. It's Otto that brings up Nietzsche, but Alexander must work this out on his own. And first, he asserts that humanity has violated nature through selfish technical progress. There has been a violation of nature. And currently, we exist in disharmony between materialism and spirituality. And so Alexander receives a gift of a book of Russian iconography. And these are called Windows into Heaven. So he has a book of that he receives from Victor, the doctor, who operated on his young son, of Russian iconography images. Windows into Heaven. And Alexander concludes we have abandoned this faith. He says humanity has abandoned this because we don't even know how to pray anymore. But formal religion only suppresses free will. That's not the answer. And aesthetics, which was his field of expertise, he said that feels like just a mimicking of another's emotions. So Alexander yearns for more. Alexander yearns for something more, for something real that will define real life. And this is a play in 3 acts. The third act is in 2 parts. So we've looked at the encounter with history and the question, the yearning for real, genuine living. And then block 2, the proposal from Otto of Nietzsche and his doctrine of eternal recurrence, which Otto interprets incorrectly, by the way. He makes it sound like reincarnation. Otto gets it wrong. It's actually dialectic. It's a triune dialectic. But that's the proposal, eternal recurrence or eternal return. And so that sets us up. We have our quest for genuine real life. We have the proposal of a life as eternal recurrence. And now we come to the third act in 2 parts. Let's go to 3A. Illuminating the unexplainable. The wife is always challenging Alexander's spiritual opinions. She is the veil of finitude. Otto shows up with his gift, a map of Europe, an original framed from the 1600s. And he declares, he says, it's a gift as a sacrifice. And he declares the axiom, every true gift is a sacrifice. While Alexander views the map, his wife veils the view with her shawl. Then Maria enters the scene in a symbolic way. She is the Virgin Mary. Remember, in Russian Orthodoxy, they have a very strong Mariology. So Maria enters as a symbolic Virgin Mary. She's to warm the plates, set the candles, open the wine. In other words, she prepares humanity for the grace of illumination. Alexander states that the plotted map is not a true representation of truth. Next, there's the search for little man, the young son of Alexander, who is the other side of every man. I mean, Alexander is every man in combination with his young son. Alexander speaks long monologues, and his young son can't speak at all because of an operation, which will eventually allow him to speak, but currently he can only listen, he cannot speak. So the 2 sides of every man are Alexander and his young son. Now, if you look at note 12, Otto states that history is a collection of unexplainable incidents that are true. And it's said that little man likes these stories of the unexplainable. And Otto gives an example of such an incident where a photograph recorded the transcendence over time, uniting 1940 and 1960. Otto says that humanity has become spiritually blind to the presence of transcendence in reality. Humanity has become spiritually blind. So we have built up to the second part of the third act. We have our quest in the first act, every man, Alexander, who yearns for real life, and a universal model and absolute truth. And then we have block 2, the proposed answer of Nietzsche and his doctrine of eternal recurrence. Then we have the moment of illumination in 3A, where we are told that we must be cured of spiritual blindness in order to recognize transcendence as objectively a possibility. That brings us to our second part of the third act. And the movie concludes with the final three steps of Nietzsche and his doctrine of eternal return as appropriated through the lens of Russian Orthodox faith. So it is a combination of the two. The movie concludes with the three steps of eternal return, but through the filter of Russian Orthodox faith. So, number one, 3B, number one, deny the self. The foghorn sounds, signifying a moment of clarity. Alexander meets Maria in the wooded area. She directs Alexander to Little Man. Alexander then has a vision of adoration. The radio comes on to say, have courage, or we can interpret it to say, have faith. Alexander ascends to his son and prays the Lord's Prayer. This is the obvious Abraham and Isaac moment of sacrifice. We see that Alexander is willing to sacrifice for the sake of deliverance from this impending war. And in this moment, Alexander declares that he will surrender to God's will. Once he makes that affirmation of faith, then we get the second step in the closing third act of spiritual cleansing. Otto tells Alexander he must go to Maria, who lives behind the church. Alexander does so, and we know this is the Virgin Mary for sure. She lives in the church. It is the Virgin Mary, represented by Maria, but it is symbolically the Virgin Mary. Now, Alexander goes to her, and when they embrace, their bodies are suspended between heaven and earth, symbolizing Christ being suspended on the cross between heaven and earth. And this newfound grace leads to the final purging, the final purgation, the final cleansing. Alexander returns to his home and burns it down. In other words, he negates materialism for the sake of spirit. He negates materialism for the sake of spirit as an act of faith in view of the grace received through the Virgin Mary, who is united to Christ. And that brings about the rebirth of embodied existence, the third step. At the end of the movie, we see Alexander, Maria, and Little Man all converging on the newly planted tree of life. Little Man waters the tree and then lays down beside it. This symbolizes Alexander's spiritual rebirth. He is reborn, but only after working through all three steps of eternal return. So the movie The Sacrifice is a Ingmar Bergman type film. Andrei Tarkovsky admired Ingmar Bergman. It's an Ingmar Bergman style film. It's a play in 3 acts. Act 1 gives you the yearning for real life and the quest. Is there a model for absolute truth? Act 2 gives you the concrete proposal from Otto that, yes, this model is Nietzsche and his doctrine of eternal recurrence. And then the final act is in 2 parts of illumination for Alexander, and then Alexander's final 3 difficult steps of eternal return. He denies the self. He goes through the stage of spiritual cleansing, and then he is reborn in new embodied existence through the symbolic image of his young son, Little Man, laying down next to the tree of life. So it's very well done. It's a good film. I can't give it 5 out of 5 stars. I do give it 4 out of 5 stars it is above average. It's a good film, but along with one other reviewer that I did listen to, I think the film needs some editing. It needs to be made more concise. Some of these long monologues by Alexander just kind of push you off track. Rather than keep you focused, they kind of put you off track. So I think it could do with a little bit of editing help, but of course, the filmmaker, Tarkovsky, would not agree with that. No artist wants his work tampered with. So as is, it is, I believe, 4 out of 5 stars. It is a good film. It is done in the style of Ingmar Bergman. It is a film about humanity's existential predicament, and the theme chosen for this film is Nietzsche and the doctrine of eternal recurrence. So I'll give it 4 out of 5 stars, and it is worth a watch. And thank you for listening to this review.